So just settling back into a comfortable meditation posture. And you can close your eyes or just lower your gaze. And beginning with some just settling, some intentional relaxation, softening the face, the jaw, the eyes, releasing the shoulders, softening the belly so the breath can easily move deeply into the body. And just checking in with yourself. How are you feeling today, right now? What are you carrying with you? The burdens of our lives. Sometimes we don't notice what we're carrying until we stop. Sometimes we don't want to notice what we're carrying, so we stay very busy. So our practice, our meditation challenges us to stop, step out of the busyness of the world, and certainly most of us do that with an intention of trying to bring more calm, more peace to our lives. But the immediate effect, the immediate felt experience can be quite uncomfortable. And we have to really bring some patience and trust to the meditation process, to sit with whatever challenging feelings or energies might be there when we start. And so there's this kind of just acknowledgement and arriving as we begin to sit, a sense of openness and acceptance, as well as kind of interest in what's going on, not avoiding, but really engaging. And then letting the attention come to rest on the breath. The breath becomes our anchor to the present moment, our anchor to our body, the, the way that we step out of the thought generating mind just by connecting with the simple sensations of breath. So each time we notice our mind wandering again, we gently bring it back to the some sensations, the movements of breath. And on each returning, it's really starting again. Another settling can happen. So as we work with the agitations and distractions and keep coming back to the quiet of breath, we don't want to move into a kind of hypnotic blankness. This isn't the goal of practice. Coming back to the breath means coming back to reality, to the felt experience. So there is this engagement that's not so much detachment, but an engagement with that felt experience. There's an interest and alertness because our breath and everything else is in constant flux, constantly changing. So to pay attention, we have to stay right on the edge of that change, not try to sink into dull, quiet. And this, of course, is a challenge because we do need to become more calm. We do need a little more space in the mind and the thoughts. We do want to get quieter. So, as with all the challenges of practice, we have to balance, find a middle way that's alert but calm, curious but relaxed. And as we often find, it's not either a matter of finding a stable place where we achieve this perfect balance, but rather a dance, kind of moving back and forth between the different energies, mind states. Oh, if all that instructions seems to be just busy making or confusing, just to come back to the simplicity of returning to the breath, of being with those sensations of breath. Oh, I am Kevin Griffin, and we have been having this little gathering here on uh, where I live, or Tuesday mornings. They might be some other time for you, depending on where you are. We've been doing this for a little over a year, and going through my book, One Breath at a Time, in a kind of random way. Well, not random. It has been, you know, going from front to back, but taking our time with it, I'll say. And so, yeah, after over 12 months, we're now just in step 8. And I guess I wanted to sort of preface today, um, talking a little bit about what I'm doing as a teacher, because I taught a workshop for a co-taught this weekend for New York Insight, which was lovely. And one of the great advantages of remote teaching is that I could be in New York without leaving home. And I co-taught with a woman who I actually mentored in the mindfulness teacher training program, and and it was called Wisdom and Compassion on the Path of Recovery. And I noticed that, like, what our teaching was largely about was about Buddhism. And then what the questions were largely about was the 12 steps. And so just to acknowledge that, I think my teaching has probably uh, evolved more towards the Buddhist side of this formula over the years. One Breath at a Time was published in 2004, so one changes over time, and so I I hate to disappoint people, and I'm always willing to talk about anything, I mean, within reason. Uh, but certainly questions, if you have questions specifically about steps, but I just have to acknowledge that, sometimes I may drift away from doing what one would sort of assume was like talking about the steps. And I got a couple of questions, at least one or two questions about higher power, which is a persistent question for people who struggle with the 12 steps, and not one I'm going to address today, but which I have certainly addressed a lot in my writing. So that's available. But we'll come back to that when we get to step 11 is the next one where higher power gets mentioned. So that's probably the next time it'll really come up here. Um, in any case, again, I just was going through step 8 in One Breath at a Time yesterday, and it's a funny step to write very much about, right? Because it seems to be just sort of a connective step, uh, but it's that's also sort of fun to me uh, to sort of see what we can excavate from a uh, simple words. So step 8 says, we made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. I think that's right. At least that's what I have in the book. It's a sort of an odd phrasing, made a list of all persons, you know, rather than made a list of everyone we had harmed. Well, I guess maybe if you say everyone, that could include animals or something. I don't know. Uh, but made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. So kind of like uh, step 6, it's kind of a preparatory step, and this one is really explicitly about willingness, um, which, as we know, is kind of a really important theme in the steps. Uh, certainly, in step three, turning our will and our lives over. Um, and I think it's worth questioning why willingness is seen as so important in the steps. Um, that I mean, I guess it's sort of obvious. If you're not willing to do it, you're not going to do it. And but I guess I guess I've sort of been curious about what willingness is, because I think we can think that we are willing, and I think that's one of the problems we face. Um, where like, oh yeah, I really want to change, and then someone says, well, maybe you should start going to meetings and we get a sponsor and work the steps. Well, Um, I don't know. I don't think that's really what I need to do, you know? I think, I think I could maybe if I started to I was thinking about training for a marathon because I think that would really, make me, you know, feel better and it get me really well, yeah, well, that's good. A marathon, that could be helpful, but, the drinking thing, oh, yeah, well, the drinking, yeah, that's true, but, anyway, you get my point that we sort of think that we're ready to change, but we're not really willing to do the actual thing that's going to change it. Um, often one wants to lose weight, for instance, and but the problem is that it might involve not eating the same food that you want to eat, and there's like, well, couldn't I? Isn't there a supplement I could take that would or I like those things. There's a thing down on Solano Avenue I walk by from now and then that says like, come in here and in 20 minutes you'll lose like 8 pounds or something. I don't know what they do. They must like slice off parts of your flesh or something. I don't know how they get all that shit off you, but it sounds good, but somehow. Okay. So, yeah, so, I guess to think about willingness is to think about the opposite of willingness, which is resistance, I would say, one way to characterize it, right? The lack of willingness is a resistance, and that's kind of I feel like that almost points to something, more graphic and more sort of, uh, specific. Like, we kinda know what resistance is. I don't wanna. I do not know. I don't wanna do that, and and I mean, I identify, I'll often say I'm a negative person, when I play golf with people, they're always like, "Oh, you'll be okay," and I'm like, "What?" "How do I what do you mean I'll be" you hit a shot into the woods, and they're like, "No, you'll be able to get out of there." I'm like, "No, how do you no, that was a terrible shot." "Oh, no, you shouldn't say something negative." I'm like, "Why not? It was bad." Anyway, I kind of relate to resistance in a way more than I do to willingness, sort of, like, oh, and it helps me to kind of, I guess, to face the negative thing rather than try to make the positive thing happen, which is, well, anyway, that's it'll take me down another route, but I talk about this a lot in Living Kindness, my book on, uh the metta practice, but sort of facing our resistance and feeling that, and it's something you feel in meditation. I think I was kind of referring to it at the beginning of the sit today. How when you first sit down, at least this is what happens to me often. Is like first sit down, it's like like it feels like there's a blockage in me, and benefit to kind of looking at and feeling resistance and breathing into that and acknowledging it and being honest about it. I was had breakfast with a friend the other day who has done a lot of research, both like study and personal experimentation with the so-called sacred medicine, the psychedelics, and he sort of did a book on the modern psychedelic movement. And as we're talking about it, at one point, he looked at me and he said, "You're very judgmental about this." And I was like, "Yes, I am. That is true." And it was, and I said, I I am judgmental, and I wanna just really own that and acknowledge that that's there, and try to then be, willing to look at other aspects, sort of recognize that there's a resistance, but that doesn't mean I have to, um, you know, act on that resistance. I can still listen, I can still think about this, I can still look at different sides to it. I actually, in that conversation, you can see we're gonna get very deep into step 8 this morning, but in that conversation, I said to him, "At some point, it would be interesting for us to do something publicly and have a public conversation about this because I'm seeing that, psychedelics they're just starting to show up in my life, not in my own usage, but in people around me, people who actually are coming into the mindfulness teacher training. I've run into several people who are, um, engaged in that work or that whatever you call it, experimentation. Um, and it's a challenging one for somebody who's been sober since 1985 because, you know, we have kind of ideas that are very well established about what recovery is. Anyway, maybe we should look at step 8. Um, so I'll read the first paragraph. Step 8, page 179 of One Breath at a Time. When I first looked at step 8, I thought, there's not much to this, just make a list. I picked up the inventory from step 4 and began to write down the names of all the people I'd hurt. But as soon as I saw the names on paper, the step looked a lot tougher. I was faced with all my destructive history. Who did I hurt? Why did I hurt them? In what ways did I hurt them? With step 8, once again, we are challenged to be willing to see the strength of our right intention. This emphasis on willingness and intention in the steps points to the stubborn, willful nature of typical addicts and alcoholics. Our self centeredness and pride often make it difficult for us to see that our way isn't always the best way to approach life and its problems. Well, that's that's a lot right there, a lot to swallow. Um, that line in the stubborn, willful nature of typical addicts and alcoholics. Mm. And that's, I mean, addiction is a kind of stubbornness, right? It's like a psychic stubbornness, being stuck to something, uh, and certainly and willfulness, you know, effort to control our experience uh, and and when we get locked into it, when we become physically and mentally, emotionally, uh, psychologically addicted, it's not just that we are being stubborn, but that the condition we are in is a very stubborn condition, right? It's hard to break it because it is an addiction. That's the sort of the definition of an addiction, something that's just you're stuck in. And of course, this is where what makes it so hard in the beginning, and even it's hard to get to the beginning, uh, you know, to arrive at a willingness to let go of our behavior. Um, but I'll go to take myself into safer territory here, maybe less emotional territory, um, and go to this right intention. which is always one of my favorite themes. Um, and so, I've made this connection and tried to and made this claim for a long time that when the steps talk about willingness, we can correlate that with the Buddhist term intention. And it's not quite the same thing, if I can parse out the difference. Willingness seems to be more about non-resistance, right? Of letting go of a resistance. That's what it suggests, I think, that and well, in step 3, maybe slightly different. We turn our will and our lives over. It's like then that's a tough one. Maybe some of you guys have some ideas about how to characterize that. It's very subtle, uh, but generally, I think of it in step 3 as being about um, guidance, being guided by what we're kind of calling God's will, or what I would prefer to say, guided by the Dharma, which is actually like guidance of Dharma is like this a silly acronym for God, um, but an intention. So but let me get back and say this. So if willingness is kind of a non-resistance, uh, uh, and a kind of going along with this guidance, right intention is more kind of forward looking. It's more establishing uh, a aiming ourselves, an aim, uh, we of course watch out for the term goal in Buddhism, but there's sort of a it's pointing ourselves in a certain way. So there's something more. I would put it as more like proactive, which is a term I really have a hard time letting it out of my mouth because I don't like it, but it does suit the meaning of what I'm trying to talk about, that it's like forward looking rather than willingness being about not, just not fighting with the situation. I hope that helps out. That's something I've never quite, uh, this has been bothering me a little bit in the back of my mind whenever I come to this correlation, willingness and intention, and I've never actually spoken to it in that way. So that's an effort to maybe begin to parse out the difference. So, but to get to what right intention is, it's an element or a factor of the Noble Eightfold Path, and and it's critical to, according to the Buddha, it's critical. It's the underlying uh, determinant of how our actions play out. Or, in other words, the intention behind our thoughts, words, and deeds is what really causes them to have the result of them. It's what really uh, um, creates the nature of the result of the action. And right intention is there are three components: the intention to um, of renunciation, that is non-clinging, letting go; the intention of loving kindness; the intention of compassion. So we can see that um, step 8 uh, is encompasses all three of these. Step 8, by saying we're, we're made a list and became willing to make amends. That willingness is a letting go of the resistance, so that's renunciation. And the act itself is an act of kindness, of loving kindness, of compassion, right? To um, when the making amends will be an act of care. So this step does uh, embodies right intention. Interesting. Um, Just yeah, okay, a couple more minutes. I'll go, try to get through this opening section of the chapter, and then there are three other sections we can go over in the coming days. The next paragraph talks about um, this friend who had a sponsee who was sort of saying, "Oh well, I'm not going to do that step," and how she and I kind of looked at each other like, "That's just bad," because it's gonna this idea of like getting into the steps and then deciding you don't want to do one of them is kind of like just a prescription for agony, it seems to me. And it can happen. I was thinking about that, how the points in the 12 steps when that happens, of course, the first place that it is not unusual for it to happen is between steps 1 and 2, where someone uh, you know, acknowledges that they're an addict or an alcoholic, but then they don't have, they can't sort of go any further and say, okay, I'm going to, you know, believe in a higher power or whatever that might mean, kind of stepping into the process, and how painful that is to be like, yeah, I'm an alcoholic, or yeah, I, I'm going to stop drinking, but I'm not going to do all this other stuff, and where that kind of leaves you hanging. Uh, and then there are lots of people who will say that they have a drinking problem, but then just don't want to deal with it, and that to me is kind of like being stuck between 1 and 2. Then I think people get stuck between 3 and 4. So if you don't know the steps, step 3 is turning your will and your life over to the care of God. Step 4 is making a searching and fearless moral inventory. And and a lot of people come to that inventory, and there's a lot of resistance. I mean, I don't know a lot of people. I imagine almost everybody when they see that, when are faced with the idea of writing this inventory. So that's a place to get stuck. I once asked somebody to sponsor me, uh, actually right after I moved to Berkeley in 1991, and I figured I should have a local sponsor, even though still had another sponsor from LA, and he was like, "Yeah, I can sponsor you, but just to let you know, I never did step 4." And I was like, "Okay, then never mind," uh, because he didn't have what I wanted, as they say. Um, and then again, I think getting stuck between 7 and 8. Seeing that list and being like, "No, no, I'm not ready to do this." Understandable. But as I say, I think really a painful place to be, to sort of be hung up between steps, because it's just gonna kinda hang over your head in a way. Um, yeah, so, I'll just read a little bit about this. "What a miserable place to wind up hanging between one step and another. Obviously, this list is a preparation for making amends, but if that's the only way we view it, we miss out on the greater value of looking honestly at who we hurt. Worrying about the next step isn't in the spirit of one day at a time, nor the spirit of one breath at a time. Even if we never make any of the amends, writing this list and looking at it with discerning eyes help us to understand ourselves and our lives. Can also be a gauge of our willingness, as over time we work our way down the list of people we might have thought we could never make amends to." So yeah, I mean, this is something that I've come to see, that the list itself is of value. So yeah, I'll read this next paragraph too. As we approach this difficult and intimidating process of making amends, it can help if we look again at why we are involved in this work. First, to get and stay sober. The experience of millions who have worked the steps suggests that cleaning up our personal relationships can help us let go of many of the destructive emotions that feed our addictions. Further, once we see that cultivating a spiritual life is the real route to happiness, we understand that we'll need harmonious relationships if we are going to live a life of serenity and joy. If we are going to journey deeply into our inner world, which has its own perils, we'll want to have as few external obstructions as possible. Um, I just, when I read this yesterday, I was just struck by how I sound like somebody out of the big book. The experience of millions who've worked the steps, you know, um, and and one of the I began by talking about how my own kind of work has and teaching has changed, and sort of my relationship to the 12 steps has changed somewhat too. That when I wrote this book, I was much more a believer in the sort of um, you know 12 steps or die kind of philosophy that AA kind of promotes to some extent, and I'm not really on board with that anymore. Uh, Still think that steps are a great path for recovery, but I've come to see that they're not the thing for everyone. That there are some other ways uh, to deal with problems, addictive problems. So there you go. That gets us started into step 8, and I will welcome any. Oh, what is the difference between aim and goal in Buddhism? Oh, well, can I maybe I can make that. The A goal is an endpoint that we need to arrive at, and that we feel that's yeah. And and by having that out there, it creates this sense of uh, distance uh, of desire to get there, the grasping, and a lack in not being there. So we could sort of see it as like duality in a way, which, yeah, okay. An aim is more like I'm right here, right now, and I'm just pointed in this direction. It doesn't take me out of this moment, really, uh, or manifest as grasping. It's just okay. I'm aiming. Yeah, actually, good. That was a well phrased question, Sherry. Thank you. Because sometimes this comes sometimes when people ask, uh, because you distinguished between goals and aims, that made it easier to me for me to, which I guess I was talking about, but you helped to me frame it. Thank you. So I will say, I've been, I don't know, I was mentioning my little uh, grandniece, Ellen, and she is getting better, by the way, gaining weight, and uh, uh, people who are following along. I, I think partly because we're so far away from everybody, haven't seen, I have uh, a niece who's having a birthday tomorrow, so she's turning 10. So uh, Iris. So I'm just thinking about her today. I have a really, not that you guys care, but because of like this weird age difference between one of my older brothers having a kid when he was 24 and my another brother having a kid when he was 63. There's that generation is like what is the difference? There's 47 years between uh, my oldest nephew and my youngest niece. Uh, uh, there you go, info that you didn't need. Questions today? Thoughts? Anything? Thank you, um, Angela, for putting in the information about the Donna and all that. People support me. Oh, thanks, Catherine. That's sweet of you to say you care. I know. I mean, hopefully it has it just makes you think about your dear ones, right? We are all, spending a lot of time away from our dear ones. Anybody want to jump in and ask a question, make a comment? Is intention similar to living by vow and the perfections in Buddhism? Thank you, David. Good question. It is. I think vow is more explicit. A vow is usually something specific. Uh, right intention is more general in that it applies to every thought, word, and action. Um, and we do see in terms of sort of the traditions, vows are more commonly, we see vows more in sort of Mahayana Buddhism, like the Bodhisattva vow. What's his name? Darren Littlejohn has a book on vows. I never read it, but it's called The Power of Vow. So, if you will. Uh, um, and then there's another one. There's like this Zen or maybe Tibetan practice. Lo, Losan. Somebody know that one? Begins with a low. Uh, if anybody can help me out here. And there's a set of kind of vows, I think that you
Low
may.
John
Log John, yeah. Can you spell
slogan,
that? Can you
the
put it?
LOJONG,
Yeah. Okay.
49 slogans.
Yeah. And they're sort of vows, Jim, or guiding
Uh,
ideas. No.
yeah, they're more like guiding ideas.
Yeah.
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 Pema Chodron teaches on them a lot.
Uh-huh. Okay. Yeah. Um, what's her name? The woman who wrote Mindfulness and the 12 Steps, Therese Jacob Stewart. She has one that might be kind of relevant for people in recovery. Um, I'm going to put her name. I think it's Jacobs in there, in case you're interested. Yeah. Uh, it's a set of practices. Thank you, Patricia. See, it's good to have people who know things. Oh, somebody said something, made a comment about willingness. The way I look at willingness is letting go of fear enough to open my hands as opposed to clinging and holding in tight. Very nice. Thank you, Monica. So, would you make amends even if you don't feel remorse? Ooh, wow. And feel resistance to it? Or would you wait until you are more ready and don't feel resentful towards the person anymore? That's a question for your sponsor. uh, but it's an interesting one, right? If you don't, would you make amends? Uh, it seems to me that if you're making amends without, I don't know, maybe other people have an opinion. It doesn't seem like that's a very skillful thing. It's like, sort of like, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah. Yeah, whatever. I mean, not that you would say it that way, but sort of, um, uh, maybe barely. I'm trying to think of the word, but anyway, not really um, intentional. Just like they're on the list, and you think you're supposed to. I think I'd wait, but talk to your sponsor if you have one. I've heard
Kevin,
what's
there
his
was
name?
also a comment about from Karen in terms of willingness and intention for her willingness precedes intention.
Oh, oh, right, right. Thank you. I know that the comments are going by quick now. In terms of willingness and intention, for me, willingness precedes intention. Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, because if willingness is like non-resistance, yeah, you have to kind of get to the point where you're willing to set an intention. Yeah, I like that. Thank you, Karen. And then somebody's saying something about chakras. Now we're really going off now, Carol. I've heard chakras have no place in Buddhist practice. Is that true? Why is it? Okay, now I'm not just like, can't just put a quarter in my ear and ask me to answer questions. Chakras, uh, I don't know. I really don't know. That's my truthful answer. I mean, I think once you understand chakras, then at which I can't say I understand them, but I mean that you have some sense of what they're about, then yeah, you're aware of the energetic centers in your body, especially in meditation. And sometimes they manifest in ways that are seem very explicitly chakra-esque, like the feeling of your heart opening, particularly, uh, or third eye kind of. But uh, that's as far as I'll go. Willingness without action is fantasy. Wow, Jim, you're tough. I'm glad you're not my sponsor. Uh, CLS seems related to right intention too. Oh yeah, definitely. Thanks, Vicky. I mean, yeah, of course. Somebody's abandoning us apparently because they're saying thank you. Oh, it is 11. See, sorry, it's okay. Um, but I never stop on time. So this thing in the chat, it's kind of, it's hard. I'd really like to hear somebody's voice if somebody would be willing to just say one thing, and then we can maybe.
Hi, Kevin.
Chris?
This
Yeah.
is Chris. Can I?
Yeah. Go ahead.
I loved the question on, should I make an amends if I don't feel the need to, and your response, which was, that's a great question for your sponsor, because that was a big part of step 8 for me. Was, like you said, looking at the list, but also discussing it with another human being.
Yeah.
So many of these steps, well, all of the steps, I've had to work with other people, or my sponsor. And for me, that was so important because I didn't want to be vulnerable with other people. I've got this huge attachment disorder, right?
Go ahead.
So a fear of, being vulnerable with others and connecting with others. So yeah, I love the part about working with other human beings in all of these steps, and particularly in step 8, and looking at that list again, which for me was from step 4, and figuring out how I hurt people and what part of me, a lot of it to do with fears, created that, my desire to hurt people. Some of the simple ones were, just because it was in the way of me using. And those were much simpler,
Right.
but all the ones to do with, this was me being fearful were tough. And I did another thing. I listened to your podcast on 10% Happier, and I loved it. So thank you very much for that. I particularly like the discussions around, because I always do, the creation of self in moment, but the birth of self, and my clinging to self, and my clinging to creating my own reality all the time. So
Yeah.
thank you very much for that.
Thanks, Chris. I think you make a really important point that I do not talk about. And, for all my sort of writing about Buddhism and the 12 steps, I think absolutely, you have to have somebody help you with the steps, because, one-on-one, especially these steps, especially obviously step 5 is sharing it with somebody, but boy, going into steps 8 and 9, I would not have tried to do steps 4 through 9 without a sponsor. I didn't, in fact. It wasn't until I got a sponsor that I started to work step 4, and people have said to me, "Oh, I'm working the steps with my sponsor, with your book, with my sponsor," and that's to me, like, that's great. But like the idea, like, you're going to take my book and that's going to, then I'm going to be the person who's like guiding you through your process. That seems risky. So that's a really good point, and I should bring it up more often. And it's tricky though, because when I'm talking about Buddhism and the 12 steps, it's like people will come to me and say, "Well, how do I find a Buddhist sponsor?" And I'm like, "Oh, just don't. You don't need one, and of course, maybe you do, maybe you find one, great. And in Recovery Dharma and Refuge, I presume they have that sort of, that's more of an option, but but I never thought it was important for my sponsor to be a Buddhist, and what was important for me was that he respected my path on Buddhism, and that he didn't try to like tell me that like, oh, you can't work the steps as a Buddhist, you have to do it in this. He didn't pull that on me. There's something else I was going to say. Oh, yeah, from my marketing standpoint, just to know that I don't know if all of you heard that I was invited to be on 10% Happier again to talk about my book, Living Kindness, which I'm very excited about because that's a book that hasn't gotten a lot of attention in the world because it's not about recovery. So like my main audience hasn't picked it up. And then the audience that it's for, the general Buddhist audience, doesn't sort of know about it, or maybe they tend to probably look on me as sort of, this character over there working the steps. And so they don't. Anyway, I've been abused and neglected, but that's normal. I'm not feeling sorry for myself or anything. I'm not a victim by any means. All right. No, I'm great. And Berkeley is incredibly beautiful right now. So I hope you guys are having a nice spring. There's a really interesting, I'm really going off, but really interesting piece by Margaret Rankel today in the New York Times about native plants. And it was on the op-ed page. If you can get the New York Times in your phone or whatever, look for that. It's like really fascinating in terms of, our environment and, well, our environment, which might be of interest to you. So that's your reading tip for the day. So what else? Anything coming up? I don't think I have anything other than Tuesday, Fridays for the next few weeks. So hopefully I'll see you back here Friday evening, 7 p.m. Pacific. And thanks, you guys. And may April be, a good start of the astrological year for everyone. Okay, I can tell nobody wants to go away. So this is what we're going to talk about now.
Thanks, Kevin.
But I was going to talk about the, the quarter-mile long ship that
Yeah.
we were powerless. Humans were powerless over it. The only way, it was a power greater than ourselves. The moon, the full moon made a really high tide, and that got it. The humans could not do it, but the, so anybody who doesn't believe in the power of, the moon and astrology obviously works. So just